trying to find metaphors and ways of observing the everyday in a more beautiful and integrated way.
But do we have any hobbies, Nomi, or am I just painting all the time?
I definitely go out in nature and I just derive inspiration.
Oh, is it ready?
Yeah.
The whole idea of being near the river and the mountain, and it was just a beautiful place.
So my name's Steve Rossi, and I'm 35 and live in Beacon, New York. We moved to Beacon in 2005, and I moved up here from Brooklyn to go to grad school at SUNY New Paltz. For me, the Hudson Valley was it was close in proximity to New York City, so that was important. For us specifically, Beacon was right on the Metro North train line. So there was a possibility of being able to work in the city and live in the Hudson Valley. On top of that, the Hudson Valley is just sort of geographically just gorgeous. So it was kind of like little day trips and stuff that we would take, just sort of sold itself to us. The type of work that I make tends to be sculptures, installations. I incorporate photography a lot. Most recently I've started to incorporate video in terms of video installations. Kind of desire to kind of make things or build things. And then there's also kind of a desire to kind of engage with the whole notion of art history in a way. Sort of that lineage of work that's been responding to other work for centuries. That's always something that for some reason I'm always kind of going back to and thinking about artists that inspire me, movements that inspire me, and sort of thinking about ways to incorporate some of those ideas. And then I think also most recently I've been interested in, over the last few years, working with ideas that relate to food and to our relationship to food on a sort of a cultural level. The way that sort of food is something that kind of our experience with food in a way sort of defines sort of who we are and what our experiences are. This piece is from, I think, 2008, 2009, and it's sort of dealing with food in a very direct way, where it's like food is the material. And sort of to do some of these cereal pieces that I was doing at that time, I was spending a lot of time at supermarkets and actually just loading up on materials in a sense. So then the notion of that experience of a supermarket has started to sort of like come into the studio in a way. So I've started to think about like what's that experience like, sort of walking through the aisle, pushing a cart, pulling things off of a shelf in any sort of quantity that we need. Like what's that all about? What's that consumer identity about? And, so those have been some of the questions that I've been interested in. I got my BFA from Pratt Institute in 2000, and I was a painting major. And then I got my MFA from SUNY New Paltz in 2006 as a sculpture major. Over the last couple of years I've been teaching on a regular basis with a nonprofit organization in the city that brings art curriculum into the public schools. And then I also teach a couple adjunct classes at SUNY New Paltz in the sculpture and art ed departments. The idea of selling work I'm not opposed to in any way, but I wouldn't want to put that amount of pressure on sort of creative process in a way. I sort of like the freedom that not having to rely on it in any ways sort of leaves you. The one thing that, we were talking about this earlier is that notion of trying to sort of continually be aware of kind of what's going on around you in a way. And the Hudson Valley being such a big region and having there be so many different and varied artists in the region, I think my advice and something that I'm continually reminding myself about is to really remember to keep kind of making that effort to sort of see what else is out there.
My name's Polly Law. I am in my 50s and I live in Kingston, New York. I grew up in Poland, Ohio, population 2,000, in the northeast corner of Ohio. I moved here 17 years ago. I had lived in New York City in both the Upper West Side of Manhattan and Brooklyn for 17 years. And the technology at the time caught up with my skill set, so I was able to move up here and still do the work I was doing at the time, which was comps and storyboards for advertising agencies. This is going to sound a little cold and calculating, but I had never been here, and I figured that 2 hours outside of the city I could afford to live because it was outside of commuting distance. And I polled my friends and they all said they wouldn't travel more than 2 hours to come visit me. So I drew a 2-hour circle around New York City, and that was Saugerties, where I lived until 2 years ago. I style myself a bricoleur and a mythologist. A bricoleur is, in the kind of plain view, is someone who makes artful use of what's at hand. And according to Claude Lévi-Strauss, the bricoleur is also a trickster figure. And a mythologist is someone who tells mythological tales. I know that if I go too long without doing any creative work, I am absolutely miserable. It's kind of like a pressure cooker where the pressure just starts to build up and something has to you either have to let the pressure out or explode, one of the two. But there have been certain influences in my artistic career. The illustrators Leo and Diane Dillon, the man who did all the backgrounds for Walt Disney's movie Sleeping Beauty, Eben Earl. I just love his design work. I was also fortunate to have artistic parents, and my great aunt Jean was a WPA artist. So I grew up with that influence. I'm working in my paper doll style still. I started doing that about 8 years ago and I really love it. I mostly show at the Woodstock Artists Association and Museum. I have a piece currently in the 50 for 50, 50 Artists for 50 Causes show, and I've gotten some very nice comments about it. I also have a book coming up, self-publishing. I'm still in the process of preparing the files of a long-term project I've been doing since 2001 called the Word Project, where I've taken odd and obscure but real words and illustrated them. Buttons rule.
Are you a collector?
Well, I use them in my work, and yes, I am a bit of a collector. I work totally from the figure.
Yeah.
I don't do any kind of landscape work. So I can't really say that the Hudson Valley inspires me directly, but I have found that the artistic community up here is very vibrant, and through the tour and working at the Woodstock Artists Association, I've gotten really tapped into that, much more than when I was living down in the city. I found it impossible to become part of the art scene down there. I actually started my artistic training at Kent State University in glassblowing. But I had a bad accident with that and decided I needed to do something a little less dangerous, and I took up weaving. And then I taught myself how to draw through working in a studio doing storyboards and comps, and just kind of took it from there. I was extremely honored and totally gobsmacked this past December when I was awarded the Yasuo Kuniyoshi Award from the Woodstock Artists Association. It's their penultimate award for artists, and I was just absolutely floored. 2 years ago I went through a really hard time. I basically lost practically everything, and have been the past 2 years starting over, and I discovered in those 2 years just how supportive and kind so many of my fellow artists are, and the award just really capped it.
So my name is Matthew Slatz, I'm 33 and I live in Staatsburg, New York. I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so I'm a Midwesterner. I moved to Hudson Valley probably 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. Mainly my wife was going to school, so it was an opportunity to kind of come out east and get to know, be close to the city but not in the city. I was very interested in not being in the city actually, but then having it close enough that I could jump down and get to it whenever I needed to. So that was actually one of the major reasons why I'm up here. So I can be in Poughkeepsie and be extremely urban, and then I can take a trip for 10-15 minutes and be in a completely rural setting. So that's kind of what I really like about being up here. So I'm the type of artist, I mean, there's words that you can use to describe, and the ones that I would use are kind of social practice, a new genre, public art, but what it kind of boils down to is that I'm an artist that's really interested in collaboration and dialogue within specific communities. It's about not being in a studio. It's about being out on the street, meeting people, talking to people, throwing ideas at them, getting them to respond, and kind of building this dialogue that then turns into maybe a visual project, maybe it's a performance, maybe it's a video, maybe it could be a text, it could really be anything. So I move across media pretty quickly, and just looking for ways of kind of engaging people. So right now I'm working on two main projects. One is a project in collaboration with the Youth Build program at Nubian Directions. So the project's called Powers That Be. When I first came to Poughkeepsie, I was really interested in when you drive, you stop at a stoplight, the light turns green, and then people would walk out in front of the car. And for me, that's a way of kind of people expressing their ability to control the space that's around them. I started working with these kids in this Youth Build program that they've dropped out of school, they don't have any real skill. The project's really about them thinking about how they identify with the city and how they influence what's around them. So really about empowerment and engagement and kind of modeling ways that they can be active participants in the community. Another project that I'm working on, which is bigger, is Middle Main revitalization. As most people know, Main Street Poughkeepsie is rather kind of, someone said vacant the other day. And I would disagree with that actually. I think it's really vibrant. It just hasn't been cleaned up the way other cities have yet, which I love. A lot of what I'm doing there is kind of curating, organizing, community organizing, doing some of my own work to kind of engage different communities within Main Street and produce some kind of interesting ideas and projects that bring up dialogue. Working with people from across cultures, because I think mainly because I'm excited about what they have to teach me more than what I have to say to them. I mean, I think by working with different cultures and different people, you just get a broader experience of what life is like. One of the main goals that all artists have is just making it easier for you to make your work. If you think about the Hudson River Valley artists, like they were coming up here to explore and be out in nature, and they'd go out in the woods for weeks and paint, and it was time away from daily life. And now we don't have that, and so I think that we've got this beautiful landscape, we've got amazing urban places that you can come to. So those are available, and you can jump in and do things whenever you want to. I hope you get something out of that.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
It's a great opportunity to be able to paint and focus on your work without focusing on income. My name is Pam Krimsky, and I'm 58 years old, and I live in Highland, New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. First time I moved to the Hudson Valley, I came here to do landscape painting, and I would say it must have been in 1979. Lived in several places in the Hudson River Valley, starting off in Red Hook. And we got tired of the landscape, and we moved someplace else and came back to Germantown. We lived there a long time. And then when I came back in 2007 again, I chose New Paltz, but I couldn't afford it, so I was very happy to find a nice place in Highland. I would say it's a combination of the beautiful landscapes and the proximity to New York City. I consider myself a representational painter. Normally paint figures from my imagination, but it comes from a long period of working from life, both landscapes and still lifes and figures. I use my work to get at something in my core that's, for many years, I should say that in the past, that I couldn't touch verbally. But now it's beginning to actually come out verbally, so I have to actually see at this point where my work's going with that, and that for me is very exciting. I lived in Iran from 1991 until 2007, and the last place I showed my work that was prominent was in the Museum of Modern Art in Tehran, in a biennial. And since then, I haven't really looked for shows in prominent places. Coming back, I've shown locally over the past year. I have a GED, and then I went back to school, and I have a master's in fine arts from Queens College in 1982. It would be Rembrandt, and then it would be Delacroix, and then it would be Van Gogh. They are a continuum in the sense that they're all open to the paint. They're all open to allowing the paint to instruct them about where to go next. And so I think if you ask painters, you'll find a lot of painters that would give you the exact same line. For the past 7 years, I've been a caretaker of my mother, who recently passed. And I love to garden. I've found a lot of consolation in digging and planting and transplanting and organizing and reorganizing my garden. I think my fine moments tend to be spiritual, actually, and therefore they're kind of like self-revelations. I would just say that everyone needs to just follow their heart, and there's nothing that you can do wrong as long as you do what your heart tells you to do.
My name is Josh Jenkins. I am 23 and I live in Poughkeepsie. I grew up in Poughkeepsie until I was 12 years old, and then maybe 14, and then I lived in Kentucky for 4 years for high school. Definitely would have to say the Catskill Mountains up there, like Lake Minnewaska. It's just beautiful. It's like a nice escape. You kind of don't see any power lines anywhere. It's just nature. And it's just a nice sense of, I don't know, you feel like you can breathe and get away from everything that you realize it's right around the corner. I would consider myself a new age abstract expressionist, I guess. My main focus currently is definitely emotions and just trying to find ways to express them in numerous medias, numerous ways. I love oils. I love charcoal especially, it's my favorite. I like to throw them all together and just pretty much whatever I can get my hands on I use. I went to Marist College for digital media, but I minored in studio art, and all throughout 4 years I was in studio classes, painting, drawing. My goal as an artist would definitely be to I just want to make a stamp in the art world. I shake things up a little bit. I want to bring it back. Definitely get people inspired. Well, my artwork is always changing. I have a pretty consistent style in a sense that even though 2-3 pieces might look completely different, people can tell they're Josh Jenkins' work. Very into lately just raw art. I kind of love the intense feel you get from it. Just something that's not finished, and something about rawness. It kind of reminds me of nature almost. It's just pure. I love bright, vibrant colors. You know, red, blue, yellow, just the purest of the forms they have, and using them because they're just so basic and easy to read and understand, and I think they express so much. Success would be, like, I'm definitely not looking for like Picasso's success or anything, but to me, I guess success would be more of just being recognized as an artist. I've never been interviewed.
Perfect. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Superpower. Probably to fly. I'd like to fly.
I would love to be able to blink my eyes, and when I open it, everything's clean.
That's a super duper power. No, it's like, that's a superpower. Peace, love. Peace, love. You know, like that. That's a superpower. I think I'd fly, probably. Fly. Selfishly, fly.
I think I would like to be enlightened, and I would teach enlightenment. I would teach like the Buddha did.
On a day like today, being able to sort of create ice, like at the sort of snap of a finger.
Heal people.
Invisibility.
I would lift up and fly.
Oh, to live forever.
To fly. Doesn't everybody say that? My name's Dana Bowl, and I'm 46 years old, and I live in Beacon, New York. I grew up partially in California, and then I went to school in Colorado, and I slowly migrated east, so I ended up in New York City in '89 and lived there for 20 years, and I just moved to Beacon in October. I'm actually moving from Beacon. I'm going to move to Gardner in the end of August. I don't want a neighbor. I rock climb, and I spent a lot of times at the Shawanagun's cliffs rock climbing. And I also was really tired of the city. I had been there 20 years, and I was ready for a change. So I wanted to be closer to the cliffs. And then this opportunity here at Children's Media Project came up. So there was sort of this whole coalition, a whole bunch of events came together. And I hike up to the top of Mount Beacon, which is amazing. And I like to sit up there and just watch. And you can actually see the cliffs from there on a clear day, and the sunset and the color and the river. It's just, that's pretty much where I go besides the cliffs. I'm involved in a lot of different creative processes. I mean, I have a show of my paintings right now, but I have been a filmmaker and involved in, you know, multi-layered imagery. I also like experiential space design. I'm really just, I love process, and I think that to me really reflects sort of an artistic sensibility, and you know, that can be cooking, which I love to do, but just really, I think sort of a generative, creative process is really what I participate in. I mean, I kind of have done a lot of deep self-exploration, and I really sort of feel like that's been an important part of my process. Part of my motivation for moving up here was also to sort of get to a place where I wouldn't have to work so hard, and I would have time to devote to painting, because it's something that I've always done, but moving here was also a commitment to really create some paintings. I feel like process is also self-exploration, and I just hope that I always find myself interesting enough and engaged enough and learning new things to keep evolving. There's a good energy here, you know, that I didn't necessarily find in the city. You know, there seems to be some hope here, which I find very nurturing and important. I think that we're in the new world order, and I think there's something happening globally. And I think smaller urban centers are being able to pick up on that because we can affect change faster. And I see that happening in the art. I would say see as much art as you can. I think exposure, talk to older artists, but then also at the same time, understand your own process and give yourself time. You know, let what's happening to you happen to you. And I think, you know, everybody figures out sort of how to work with themselves ultimately. And I think that's really what art is.
My name is Tom De Niro. I have been living in Monroe, New York for about 14 years. I'm 53 years old, and I'm just loving doing art.
Great.
I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut, and grew up there my whole life and just kind of hung out. And, went to school in Hamden, Connecticut at Payer College. I've been finding as I start heading out to other areas of the Hudson Valley and in Orange County in general, I've found a lot of beautiful areas. I do works on paper, ink mainly. I would consider my style would be super realism. When I see buildings or a beautiful area or a beautiful town, I look at that and say, I want to draw that. I think it's representing the buildings and the surroundings in a way that it's not just it doesn't look like a black and white photograph, but it has still some very neat art elements to it and creative elements to it. But what I like to do is, because there's many historical areas around here, I would like to try to take some of those old photographs from the archives, like from the early 1800s, and then reproduce those and draw those to make them more current. Show my stuff at the Orange County Arts Council, which is a very beautiful building. It's the Slegman Estates. It's a beautiful building. I actually did one of my drawings is of that place. It's that pretty. I'm excited because there are so many artists here, and that it is pretty popular. And I found that it's pretty worldwide and world renowned of the artists from Hudson Valley. So that motivates me to continue. So I think I'm going to try to do much of my subject matter within the Hudson Valley. So I think it's the most interesting stuff anyway. I studied advertising and illustration, but more on the technical side, technical illustration. That's where I got my style from. In general, people here have a real good appreciation of art and music as well. Finest success, I think, is my family. Even though I don't know if I've done it all perfectly, but I'm trying my best to make it a success in my life. I think to just keep going, keep trying, keep working on your craft, honing your style. Don't look at other artists and say, "Oh, I want to do that." Just figure out what you do well and just do it, and don't chase someone else's style. Just work from the heart.
Beth Haber, and I'm living in LaGrange. So we lived in Fishkill for 4 or 5 years, and then we found this place that looked in need of care, and we thought we could undertake it, and didn't realize it would be a lifetime. We were told that Rochambeau stayed here, and when Lafayette came in 1826 on his big return, which is when they changed the name of the area from Freedom Plains to LaGrange in honor of Lafayette. I'm interested in layering and narratives within layers, and a house like this has that. And I think more for my work at this point is just interacting with nature, the trees, what grows here, the light, that does find its way into my work. I'm interested in finding the place between observation and imagination. And I'm also been, for way longer than I've lived here, was drawn to Japanese art. One of the things, part is that floating world sense, but also this very comfortable way that they lead between observation and abstraction. Light in the Hudson Valley has a not a sharp clarity, but there's something both soft and subtle. And see, when I have worked in other places, it's a shift of palette. My undergraduate degree was at Goucher College. Started with fine arts. They had no studio major. I transferred to CCNY in New York, which had a really amazing art department of almost entirely European immigrants. One I would say was probably the most influential was a professor I studied with, Simon Lissam, who was a Russian emigre who had studied with Diaghilev. And so his work was all about, there was an oriental quality to his work and a heavy ornamentation. I see some of that notion of icon and illumination that has always been like a thread within my work. To be an artist is a bifurcated life in lots of ways. I've done a number of things. I've written books on art, I've taught art history, I've done film work, I have a small design company. I think one of the things that's really struck me about the art community in Hudson Valley is that it is a pretty outgoing community, and that's a real strong suit it carries. I guess about 3 or 4 years ago I was in Seattle, and I was visiting with the curator for the contemporary art at the Seattle Art Museum. And I was introduced as an artist from the Hudson Valley, and this young curator just got completely starry-eyed, and she said, "Beacon?" It was like, oh my goodness, Beacon, yes, Beacon. It was a revelation.
Okay. I'm Ryan Cronin, 38, New Paltz, New York. Yeah, in 1992 I came here I was out west in Boulder, Colorado, and I came to SUNY New Paltz as a photo major at that time. And then it reminded me a lot of Boulder, and because I lived in Manhattan for a little while, I went to SVA down there, and it's just kind of, it's nice to be close, but out, and I like the small village. You walk down the street, you say hello, everybody's like kind of hello. A painter, then you kind of have to define yourself from there. I guess contemporary, you hate to say it, contemporary pop painter with some, outsider and some lowbrow and a little bit of pop surrealist and neo-expressionist and, things that normally, haven't, I guess you'd call them, lowbrow aesthetic, kicking a pile of shit, or the phrase of a shit-kicking good time, and then elevating it to, taking something that's, culturally low, the wiffle ball, or eating sausage. It's the subject is sort of, a little gritty, but it has some humor to it. When I moved here, I kind of saw, the hand-painted signs, and that's kind of what really propelled me into, painting, and just photography to me became this craft where it was you're in the dark room and you're chemicals and process, so it just to drive, when I used to drive around, see firewood for sale, and clean fill needed, and little illustrations or whatever next to it kind of set me off in that direction. It's reasonably inexpensive to live here. It's getting more expensive, but it's reasonably inexpensive to live here, and it's a beautiful place to live, and there's a lot of great people here, especially in New Paltz. If you want, you just got to keep making art. That's the bottom line. It's production. Find something in life that this is what professors told me. Like, you have to find, either if you become a teacher, then you have to find a career that doesn't consume your life and swallow your artistic career. So you're giving up a lot, but at the same time you're allowing yourself to become a painter.
Sure.
So you have to find that balance between making money and making art.
Very much.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. That was nice.
Yeah.
Did a nice job. You guys got anything?
My name is Melissa Toth, and I live in the town of Newburgh, and I am 30 years old. Grew up mostly in the town of Newburgh. I moved around the Hudson Valley though. I've lived in Walk Hill, I lived in Rosendale, I lived in Stone Ridge, kind of came back around, stayed in New Paltz for a while, but always in the Hudson Valley. But definitely the seasons have been a big influence on my staying here. I love the fall. Every year I feel like it's magic in the Hudson Valley, and I haven't really experienced it to that degree anywhere else that I've been. I think first and foremost I identify myself as a poet, and that my visual work is illustrative of my poetry, exploring ideas about higher consciousness, awareness, connecting to other human beings and connecting to other types of experiences. I did a piece most recently. It was an illustration for a poem that I wrote called She Sleeps with Caterpillars, and it was kind of like this free verse poem, and it ended up leading into an illustration. Kind of had an image in my mind of creating something sparkly and magical and that kind of felt otherworldly and fantastical, and would then line up well with just trying to pay attention to those moments within your everyday that make you stop and realize who you really are and how you feel in the space that you're in. I hope to eventually get my writing out there in a broader sense, start sharing that with a larger audience, maybe do readings. I think I'll always continue to make visual art as a component to that. I really want to start creating environments for people to explore their feelings and to explore their awareness, and hopefully encourage them or inspire them to tap into their higher consciousness. If the world ended and then like aliens came, or like the next culture of humanity began, that what would really inform them of who we were wouldn't just be a written history. It would be our artwork, it would be the monuments we left behind, it would be the ruins that we left behind, and how would we be defined then, and how would they interpret that? That's always been really interesting to me. I am ready to see. I am ready to be more than a cutout shape of woman existing, more than a human form who's half listening, more than a collection of chromosomes combining and twisting, atoms and cells multiplying and splitting. So please, remember to leave a light on for me, because the new horizon is rising, and I am ready to see it clearly.
If Hollywood made a movie about your life, whom would you like to see play the lead role?
Boy, I'd love to see Kate Blanchett, but I'm pretty sure that they would hire Kathy Bates.
Yeah, I don't know. At one point, someone used to say that I looked like Bette Midler. I have no idea.
So I guess Harrison Ford comes to mind.
Well, I'd like to see Brad Pitt.
Can't imagine. I would have said, and I don't even know if she's still alive, Anuka May. But I have no idea.
I guess Jeff Goldblum could play it. At least he looked like me.
I like Kate Blanchett.
Martha Stewart. Sorry, that was off the top of my head. I have no idea.
Oh God, I don't know. Maybe if we could bring back River Phoenix. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Diane Keaton, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah, you can see that maybe?
Jack Nicholson. Because there's a quirk in him that maybe there's something in me someplace. I'm Michael Sibilia, and I'm 57, and I live in Hopewell Junction. I grew up in a lot of places. I was born in the Bronx, and when I was about 13, our parents moved to Mahopac. I lived there for a little bit. At 15, I decided to discover the world and left and traveled the United States for about 3-4 years, and came back and settled in Cold Spring, and then from there I met my wife, and I moved to Beacon, and now I live in Hopewell. The beauty of the landscape, it's so green. Other parts of the country, it gets green for 2 months and then turns gray and brown, and over here it's kind of nice, and the seasonal change I like a lot too. I'm a photographer, and originally I called myself last year an environmental photographer. This year, as things are changing, I'm doing more photo documentary work and becoming more and more towards fine art, and I've been photographing people more this year. I used to photograph people a lot. I switched to landscape, so I come around and I'm kind of a reactive photographer, and whatever catches my eye or my glance is what I shoot. I've been working a lot in El Salvador, and working with the people there and working for a nonprofit down there. And the discovery and understanding of a new community and a new, for me, way of life, that people live much simpler and they need a lot less. And in a way, they have so much more. Because of the history of art in the Hudson Valley, and since I shoot a lot of landscapes, I think the Hudson Valley School has played an influence. And because arts are growing in the Hudson Valley, a Beacon is becoming more and more wonderful. Poughkeepsie's struggling to try to get off the ground, and I hope they do someday. But there's a birth going on here that I think really helps me, and maybe that gives me a little motivation too. When digital photography came and I didn't have to worry about how many frames I shot, all of a sudden my work started growing tremendously. And I started learning more, and I learned, why isn't this photograph work? So I think just working and working and working and working and working and studying and looking at art, and just keep going on and on and on and on. Art has opened up my heart and my mind in so many ways that I wish that I found it much, 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 much earlier in my life, but maybe I did and just never knew it.
I'm 43, and I live in Beacon. I grew up in Germany. I grew up in the southwest of Germany. It's a very small village called Schutterzell, and it's near Freiburg, which is probably the closest, if anybody would know of it. We moved here 5 years ago, which is 2005. We lived in the city, in New York City, and we lived in 3 different neighborhoods, and then we decided, that city life was over. I think it's actually a little bit of memory. I mean, I come from, basically I'm in the Upper Rhine Valley, that's where I grew up. And this is basically between the Black Forest and the Vosges, and it just looks very much like it. By profession, I'm a gilder, so I derive my work, my artwork, from my profession. So what I use is the traditional techniques, gilding techniques, and it's embellishing techniques, and I transform them into contemporary works of art. So when the creative process starts, I think it's not even me, it's just something that takes over and it just happens. The focus for me right now is very much, and has been from the beginning, nature. I think that nature is just, it's just infinite beauty. Nature has always been the greatest inspiration for me. I am what they call an emerging artist, so this is my second solo show. I've had several group shows, and my first solo show was actually at Gallery G here in Beacon. It's basically, what I use is, I work on panels, and all the panels are gessoed, which is the traditional gesso made from rabbit skin glue and whiting. And then some of them I do gesso carving, so that's just the gesso itself, but it's about 20 to 30 layers of gesso, and then I carve into it. And then others, like the one right here, is a sgraffito, which is a very traditional technique in which the gesso then is gilded, and I use silver leaf, unlike the traditional gold leaf. I use silver leaf, and then I put an egg tempera on it, and once the layer of egg tempera is on, I then scratch out the patterns. Well, I think the only thing that I try to keep in mind for myself is that life evolves, and no matter what happens, it's okay. I mean, you know, whether if I succeed as an artist, it's great, it's a bonus. If I don't succeed as an artist, it's not going to be the end of my world. And life has so many things to offer, and obviously there are doors that open up, you know, and if you reach a door like that and you actually see it's open and you go through it, then it might lead to something, you know, and whatever it leads to is just part of life's adventures.
I'm James Westwater, and I'm 48, and this is Beacon, New York.
Where did you grow up?
Mostly in Lavenham, England, little village 70 miles north of London. Medieval village, famous for Yoko Ono's and John Lennon's balloon movie, Apotheosis. We moved here in 2005. Thought about moving to the city, and we looked in Manhattan, Brooklyn, went to places. What attracted us to Beacon initially was Deer Beacon. I mean, that's how we were aware of Beacon. But there were so many other good things about it once we started to really look closely, and we found a good space to live and work in. It felt more sustainable in terms of sustaining life. That felt a little more natural. There's something about the light. It's relatively open, I guess, if you compare it to the city. Pastoral, bit of space, gives you heads. Well, it's kind of indefinable, isn't it, really? I mean, it just happens, the inspiration. But you've got to also just work, I think. I believe in that. My father always said, you know, if you're stuck, just keep working. Just do something. And, you know, and it's, I mean, I guess I've been painting a shape for 10 years, 15 years, so it's a little easier. I can just kind of step back into that. But then, what, you know, that's the framework. It's sort of a quotidian aspect, you know, daily practice in the studio. It's a parallel-sided oval, so it has 2 straight lines and 2 curves.
Prior to this, you painted squares.
Yeah.
And then how long were you painting squares?
Oh, since the early 80s. I did paint a few other things, but those were the 2 geometric shapes. You know, but the square is an art historical thing. Malevich, Mondrian, I mean, a lot of people have painted squares and rectangles. And I think I was making more of an art historical comment with that. I wanted something that was a little kinder, gentler, as hard edge shapes go. Had a feminine aspect and a masculine aspect, and wasn't so sort of locked into what we expect to see in geometric art. It's just off enough to keep me interested, and it's, as far as my daily practice again, you know, I'm basically painting a curve, painting a straight line, painting a curve, painting a straight line, painting, and filling in and just repeat. Many, many times to build up the paint and changing the colors. And I have a BA in Design for Communication Media, which is not fine art. I went to film school and switched to graphics. I've learned to do a lot of things while I've been an artist, a lot of other things to make money. Carpentry, buying and selling things at the flea market and on eBay, fixing up old cars, prostitution, gun running. At some point it doesn't really matter where you live. You're just going to keep making paintings. Not necessarily the same paintings, but there's a continuity that's independent of location.
Okay, Carla Goldberg, and I'm 44, and I live in Nelsonville, New York. I'm very proud of the fact that it's Nelsonville, and there's just a few blocks. So if you go through Cold Spring and you blink your eyes, you've gone through Nelsonville. I grew up in California, in Palm Springs, and I grew up with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, and they were fantastic. Wanting to be in New York, but not quite being brave enough to be in Manhattan at that point, even though I'd been living in Baltimore, right smack in the middle of the city, for graduate school. It was also the area. It just was incredibly beautiful. And we took a drive up, and I thought, no wonder there was a whole school devoted to it. Look at the light here. It's just amazing. Probably the best way to describe it is mixed media, because I do like to use lots of different materials. At the moment, for maybe the last 6 years, everything has had resin in it. And for me, the resin, it looks like water, and I can do work that's sort of like a conversation about the river, about the region, playing with science of the river, as well as folklore. Like if you've ever seen an ultrasound of a baby in the womb, they're doing these ultrasound photographs of the bottom of the river. And my husband had shown me an image of that someone had drawn benthic lines on top of, which is kind of like the topography. Those, you know, when you see a topographical map and it has those lines. And this was about the flow of the river. And it just grabbed me right there. That kind of imagery, the texture and the fluidity of line ended up being part of the signature of my work. The subject matter that I'm working with right now for the last year has been the female torso, and playing with the idea of goddesses who are divas. They're not, you know, your religious kind of a diva, religious kind of a goddess. These are women who know what they want, and part of their action creates the storms and the waves in the river. So some of it comes from ideas from many different cultures of water goddesses. And a description of a goddess will catch my attention, and then I'll add that to maybe a name of another one, and it becomes my own. So I'm writing a new myth. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Studio Art and in Art History. I have a Master of Fine Arts degree from Maryland Institute College of Art. Just keep working, keep painting, but also give, if you really want to show, you have to give equal time to promoting yourself, to searching out venues. And just because someone slams the door on you and says, no, not for me, because that's part of the art business, and you have to grow a tough skin and get used to the fact that most of the time it's going to be a no. Don't let that stop you. Just keep pursuing your art and keep trying.
My name is Ron English, and I'm an artist working and living in Beacon, New York. I actually grew up in the Midwest, and when I graduated high school I moved to Texas. That's where I went to college. And most people that know me think I'm from Texas, so I just let them think that. After college, I went to New York for 20 years, and at some point it seems like in the city there's diminishing returns. It's like you've already made whatever connections you're going to make, or establish yourself as far as you're going to go. And then we came up here to get quality of life. And also, kind of strangely, like these two big schools of art happened in my lifetime in the last 20 years. Pop surrealism and street art became very big, and I was kind of actually part of both of those things as they came up. So like there's a lot of pop surrealists and there's a lot of street artists, and I'm kind of both, and I hang out in both worlds. Like as an artist, usually I wake up every day with a different idea, and I kind of have the luxury of being able to actually realize most of those ideas. I think also as an artist you're very influenced by where you're at, and I think my work is probably a lot different, being here than being in New York City. Like the thing it's most like is being a musician, and if you're a musician and you get a hit song, then you can keep bumping along as a musician, and if you get 3 hit songs, you have a career, and so on and so on. And I seem like I'm able to get a bit hits, you know what I mean? Some of my images actually take off and become very huge. Like last year, I think, last year during the campaign I did the Abraham Obama, and that just went everywhere. It was huge. And then before that I did like Maryland with Mickey's, and it got huge. And so like seems like I'm like one of those kind of artists like Neil Young or somebody who can usually pull a hit out of their ass. You know? Everything you do is a copy in life, everything, you know. And it's like how close to the source or how far away from the source do you want to get. I like the idea of there being something familiar. So you already feel like, okay, I know what this is, but then it isn't right. But it's like, first you have that level of comfort, then you have the discomfort instead of just starting off with the discomfort. But also, it's the way I originally looked at it, because like I was kind of a political activist and I was trying to make a certain statement about something, like one of my big issues was like using cartoon characters to sell cigarettes to kids. So, but how do you change the perception of something if they can take out 10 million ads and you can take out 10? But your little image can change the perception of the image they're putting out there. Do art that you want to see, you know, do what you want to do, because whatever you do, you kind of get stuck with it, and you do owe something to other people. So like if you get a gallery and you're doing a certain kind of work, and you're doing that work because you think everybody likes Basquiat, so I'm going to paint like Basquiat, you know, because I would just want people to like me or whatever. And then, but you don't really like that. Now you're stuck doing that because now he's already developed clients for this, and now you have to fulfill a demand. Because, you know, you have a partnership and you owe them that because you presented yourselves as this. So you get stuck making whatever you're making. And if you're making what you like, then you get stuck making what you like. And if you're making something for the wrong reasons, because you think that's what people want or whatever, or you see somebody else having success making a certain kind of image, then you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life, because you will be successful, but you'll be successful doing something you don't like instead of something you like. Either way, you're going to be successful as long as you stay at it.
If you were a cereal box in a long grocery store aisle,
Okay.
why would I put you in my shopping cart?
Because there's a surprise in every box.
What's your favorite color?
My favorite color today is green.
Okay. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you want to grow up to be?
An artist.
Is there anything I missed? Anything else you want to add?
Nope, I can't
Great.
think of anything.
Okay.